So welcome everyone to the launch of Real Oxford. I'm Mick Felton. I'm the publisher at Seren, publisher in Wales, independent publisher, which is celebrating its 40th birthday this year. We have a long association with Patrick McGuinness, whose Booker long-listed novel, The Last 100 Days, we were proud to publish way back in 2011, I think. And our association with our other guest tonight, Peter Finch, and the Real series is even older, 19 years, in fact. It's a series which has allowed us to travel from Oxford to Cambridge, from Glasgow to Bloomsbury, and from Aberystwyth to, yes, Barnsley. I'll leave Peter to introduce the series and tell you more about what makes a real book. But this book, Real Oxford, is the 26th in the series. What does it tell us about its subject? I asked myself, and we're all asking ourselves prior to Patrick's talk. Oxford, we're told by the author of Real Cambridge, is the left brain of Oxbridge. And left brain is meant to favour the logical, the analytical, and the objective. And they're certainly present in Real Oxford, but the author is more right-brained, I'd say, which means intuitive, thoughtful, and subjective. And Patrick's narrative picks out unexpected connections, oddments of history and of experience, and plenty of his own imaginings about and interpretations of the city, both town and gown, which I'm sure he'll tell us about in characteristically entertaining fashion. I know that I was entertained and informed when I worked on the book with him. It was one of the highlights of my editorial year so far. But let's not have me talking. Let's hand over to Peter Finch for a description of what a real book is, and then on to Patrick. Peter.
Thanks, Mick. Hello and good evening. I'm Peter Finch. I'm the Real series editor. The very first Real book came out, as you've heard, 20 years ago nearly now, in 2002, and that was Real Cardiff 1, which I'd written sort of on a whim in response to a request for an article from a magazine in Aberystwyth, which asked me if I could delineate the changes that were going on in the city of Cardiff. And I didn't notice any changes, so I thought I'd better go out and find out what they are. And the book was the result, and the series spun from that. And here we are, virtually 20 years later, taking over the world. Real Los Angeles next. We can always live in hope. So what are real books? Exactly what are they? What does this mean, this real thing? I was asked this by Nigel Jenkins, who was the editor, who was the writer of 2 volumes in the end on Swansea and a volume on Gower. What was a real book? And this is what I told him. We discussed the process of writing these books, quarter the city, take in the outlying districts, work out the connections, make the place as big as you can, walk the patch, delve and ask questions, read the histories, meet the people, dive deep into your own memories, and where those are lost or non-existent, latch on to others who are still in touch. Meet the famous and the local, ask them to show you the parts with which you are less familiar, uncover what you can of local mystery and find out where the lines of energy are that make this place spin. Understand the city, work out why it is, and what it is now, and how it's here and what will happen next. Walk everywhere, never drive. Use your own bike where appropriate, take the bus and take the train, make notes, make more notes, write it down, then up, fashion the many fragments that you now have into a satisfying whole, a psychogeographic whole, a thing worth reading. That's how to make a real book. And Patrick, of course, is now a master. So I want to ask Patrick some questions, chuck him a few things to ask him how this thing worked for him. Tell me, Patrick, you arrived in Oxford in the early 90s. How much of the industrialized urban Oxford was still there?
Well, there was a lot more of it there than I knew, because coming here in 91, as I did, to start my doctorate, the first thing that I saw, and in a sense, this is where my book begins, it begins with Rewley Road Station, which those of us who have been here a very long time, over 20 years, remember was Oxford's second station, which was in fact a MOT centre and garage in our day. And I suppose that my first impression of Oxford, which I think is everybody's, if they come in by train, is of extraordinary anticlimax, because Oxford Station is a horrible, small, tacky little station. It's like the shell of a bankrupt garden centre. And you come out into the city that you are told is going to be this extraordinarily beautiful place, and you see perhaps the worst side of Oxford. And actually, Edward Thomas called this approach to Oxford, the station quarter, the most contemptible in Europe, which was pushing it somewhat. C.S. Lewis, in his autobiography, has a very funny section where he talks about taking the wrong turn. He comes out of Oxford Station, turns right, down into Botley, rather than left. Being C.S. Lewis, of course, he recuperates the disappointment of seeing this place that he describes as a not very interesting little market town dwindling into countryside, into a sort of belated revelation, because he turns around and then he sees that actually the best view of Oxford is from what he thinks of as the worst part of Oxford, and so on. So I was interested in approaches, and my approach to Oxford, I remember it as if it was yesterday, was coming out of the station and seeing this decrepit station, Rewley Road. And it set me off thinking about doubles. The book is full of doubles, reflections, spectrality, the actual station, the old station. It's written by the me of now, thinking about the me of back then. It's about industrial Oxford in a way, much more than it is about the university Oxford. And there are all sorts of things I didn't really get about Oxford, like Oxford as a car city, which it still was when I arrived too, and it still is now. None of these things a student, and indeed many academics, are especially interested in. We're interested in ourselves, our friends, our books. And this book, which has just come out, I got my copies today, is a way of kind of saying sorry to the place I've lived in with almost no consciousness of its actual history for so long, 30 years. I'm glad you mentioned driving as well, because for the first 15 of those 30 years, I couldn't drive. So I did a huge amount of walking. I didn't do enough noticing. I did too much looking, looking at stuff, looking at the Radcliffe camera, looking at the buildings, but I didn't notice things. This is a book about noticing. So it tries to stay at the level of the street, the pavement, the towpath, the canal route, and so on. And
when you came here first, when you first arrived, you had expectations of the place that you were arriving at, which were dashed, you say, by the tattiness of the station. But what happened after that? Did it live up to your expectations?
Yes, and it continues to live up to my expectations. And over the last years, I've tried to basically walk as many routes as possible in different ways too, not just outwards from center to periphery, but radially, in circles, semicircles. It continues to interest me. I mean, I'm very lucky as well that Oxford is full of extremely interested historians and local historians who've got these extraordinary websites, local history websites that I could look up on my phone as I was walking around as well. So I was interested in this kind of calking of the place, that at any moment I wasn't just walking to work, I was walking through and over and past a series of places that had their own kind of energies and histories and characters, but of course don't make it into the official history of Oxford, which is incredibly university biased. It's incredibly aestheticized. And I was interested in quarrying the little gaps. I mean, there's another thing, of course, that when you walk to work, and some of my neighbours are here this evening, when our walk to work involves, going down Stratford Street, up Jackdaw Lane, down Iffley Road, past Magdalen, over Magdalen Bridge, past the Sheldonian Theatre, and so on and so forth. You have this incredibly beautiful walk, but it kind of stops you noticing other things. And I began to be interested actually in buildings, places, histories that didn't seem to cry out for attention. So that's what this book is about.
Do you think, every place, of course, has a history. There's nowhere that has no history at all. But some places seem to accumulate more than others. Do you think that you're in one of them?
I think it accumulates a certain idea of history, which is of great people, usually men, great architects, usually very sort of aesthetically inclined ones. It's a history that marginalizes its industrial history. It marginalizes its working history, its working class history. I mean, part of the book is about the huge swathes of demolitions that the centre of Oxford, St Ebbe's and St Thomas's, had to undergo, either because of university expansion or developers and so on. It has, until recently, marginalised and occluded its history as a place of that has benefited from colonialism and slavery and so on and so forth. So whether there's more or less history to the place seems to me less important to question than whether the available histories are not only seen and kind of properly looked at, but also tied up and connected. I suppose the book is about connectedness and connection.
Let me ask you then, is the industrial history of the city and the academic history of the city, if we can call it that, are those two coincidental? Do they feed off each other? Would they have existed if the other one wasn't there?
Well, I suppose one of the big changes which you see everywhere in Oxford is the way this kind of South Midlands city became an industrial powerhouse because William Morris decided to build his cars here and not somewhere else. William Morris lived on James Street, which is just down here on the way into town. And he began as a kind of bike repairer, and he kind of saw where the wheel was going, as it were. And that part of the station, which I begin describing in my book, Street of Wheels, which is this kind, still not very nice bit of Oxford, which no one can fully decide what to do with, grew up and thrived opposite the jam factory, thanks to the arrival of the motor car. And the big change, I guess, was that Oxford had a working class that mainly serviced the colleges. And suddenly it needed thousands and thousands more people to come and work in the car factories. And the associated industries that fed and thrived off the car factories. And in fact, one of the things I found out while writing the book was that William Morris, who's a Fordian capitalist, he had many qualities, but he was also an enthusiastic donor to the British Union of Fascists, was extremely anti-union. And one of the problems he had was that thousands of Welsh workers came from South Wales with already a highly literate political culture and a strong sense of wanting unionization and union rights, and they worked in his factories and demanded union rights. He inquired of the Home Secretary whether it was possible to stop Welsh workers from migrating around England, bringing their dangerous ideas. So you have a sense there already that the massive changes in Oxford are brought not so much by industry, but by a small and very intense period of industrialization and the motor car.
So
Do
what
they coexist? Yes, they do. Are they linked more than people think? Yes.
So what is that industry, which can't be industry in the sense that it used to be? What is it becoming replaced by, transformed into?
Yeah, so, well, one of the things about this book, the position from which I wrote this book, in order to write the book, I had to develop a voice that kind of captured what it might be like to see this place for the first time and also for the last time.
Yeah.
And if you read this book, you will see that there's an attempt to create a writing voice that is caught on this kind of fine line between first time ever and never again, going, gone. And one of the things that I have noticed just in the time that I have lived in Oxford and walked through the streets is, and this was actually something that a friend of mine remarked on, that people who come from Oxford do not necessarily live anywhere near the centre of town anymore. So Oxford is a hugely international place. As I say in my preface, you know, whenever I find the world, and more particularly England and Britain, shrinking, I just go into work, where I will hear a dozen different accents, languages, and see all kinds of mind-opening things. But at the same time, I also notice that Oxford no longer really belongs to the people who have lived here for generations. And this is part, incidentally, of an ongoing process, which I talk about in the book quite a lot, of moving the urban working class out of the centre of town. One of the things that most shocked me about doing the research for this book is that where the Westgate shopping centre is now, and the area called St. Ebbs and Oxpens, was this kind of thriving working class suburb, which was described incidentally by the Victorians and by 20th century planners as slumland, you know, ripe for clearing. On the other hand, that was also what they called Jericho, which is Oxford's most shishy, authentic-ish, that's a debatable point, authentic suburb. And you think to yourself, well, Jericho survived, although of course the kinds of people who used to live in Jericho can't afford to live there. But you have these swathes of the city centre that could have been like that. And Jericho itself, incidentally, was almost redeveloped in the same way. So I guess my feeling about the changes is that, one of the things that my book talks about is gentrification, but also universitification of the city.
Let's talk about that gentrification.
Development.
Tell me how much the book discusses the ways in which we ourselves are the causes of the changes that we mourn. I mean, are you complicit somehow in your writing of the book in the changes?
I'm totally complicit. Would you like me to read the section in which I'm
good idea
extremely complicit? So this is about a street called Princes Street, which is very close. It was my first home. So this is an extract from the book, and you'll see that the book is written in a kind of slightly dual holographic present tense, which is kind of fused with the past. And you'll get a sense of the voice in the book from this. I should say, incidentally, that if you don't like what I'm about to read out, you won't like the book, because the book, this is it, as it were. This is how it sounds. Okay. So, walking home from St Clement's via East Oxford Community Centre on Princess Street, I like to check on my first house. Today, a young couple is moving out, loading a van. I ask if I can pop in and look round. I explain I used to live here. I feel some part of us, incidentally, still lives everywhere we've ever lived. But I don't say that because I'd sound like a weirdo preaching the nostalgist's droit de seigneur to people driving into the future. When I first arrived, academics and London commuters priced out of Jericho and North Oxford were moving in. Areas like Jericho, affordable up until the mid-90s, were suddenly out of range for young academics or first-time buyers. East Oxford became our territory. The place glowed with dinner parties seen through newly installed sash windows. You could smell the asparagus steaming. TLSs and LRBs poked out of the recycling. There was the buzzing of drills and electric saws, either that or a lot of Stockhausen, and the domino ripple of loft conversions, street by street, skip by skip. It's still going on. The worst of it was that the people I peered at through the windows in the soft lit rooms with such contempt, they were people like me, and those weren't windows, those were mirrors. An hour after I walked into my brand new Princess Street home in 1998, my neighbour came to welcome me. Doris was 92. Born in the house she lived in, she had that beautiful Oxford accent I hardly hear anymore. Imagine 2 parts West Country to 1 part Midlands, or is it vice versa? She told me I'd be happy here, that people here weren't nosy, they just looked out for you. She and her cat, Tracy, lived on Doris's pension from the British Potato Council, which was in Cowley, where she worked all her life. But Doris was in the early stages of dementia. She sometimes asked me to buy things for her and then eyed me suspiciously when I brought them back. The supermarket was 2 streets away, but the rush of Cowley Road confused her. When she set out, we kept an eye on her. She was never far, but all places are far from home when you're lost. The illness took over fast. I moved in October. By February, her old self was intermittent, like a scattered radio frequency I had to chase with my dial. But she was right about the community. People rallied to her, everyone it seemed, but her own family. Her closest friend was Olive. Olive called on Doris twice a day, brought food, did her shopping. But she did one thing that Doris abominated. She took her to church. It was a kind but predatory Christianity. Every Sunday, Olive came for Doris, and Doris would shout, "I don't want to go to your shitting church. I don't care about your bastard God." A couple of hours later, she'd be back like some Old Testament figure, fuming, haranguing her maker and his church with fabulously inventive imprecations. She sounded pretty on the ball then. 1999 to 20 was one of the coldest winters for decades. Doris caught gangrene from an untreated cut. When she finally got to hospital for an amputation, she was too fragile to operate on. She caught flu, then died, but she left her house to Olive, who sold up fast to a builder-developer called Clive. Not a company or a flashy millionaire, just someone who bought houses, did them up as he lived in them, then sold them on. Clive was also local. He dug up the garden for his extension and found the buried bodies of 13 cats, Doris's lifetime in pets. Their grey skeletons, some still leathery, their skin like beef jerky, some so dry they exploded when they hit the skip, joined the pizza boxes and empty tubes of no more nails. Clive was good company. We drank together occasionally over the fence, and we once went to the pub. I found his politics unpleasant. He found mine hypocritical. The gentrification machine, he called it, and I was part of it. It made him rich, made me a hypocrite, he said. But gentrification, I thought, maybe was middle-class bad faith, monetized. We lied to ourselves and we knew it. We pretended that what we loved about East Oxford was its character, its difference, its authenticity, even as we changed it to make it less like itself and more like, well, us. Real Oxford, oh yes, please, I'd love some, but can I have mine decaf? We liked the idea of living here, but we wanted to change it into what we already knew, the corner shop into a deli, the bakery into a patisserie, pub to wine bar. In summer 2000, I moved to Cardiff to join my partner, selling up to a Welshman who owned a scuba diving business in Belize. He was a garrulous, sociable chap, and he'd pop in during the interminable weeks of house sale and take me to dinner or drinks with his friends. I looked him up recently to see what he was up to. He was found dead in his flat in the island paradise of Ambergris Cay in 2015, in a state of decomposition so advanced it was impossible to tell how he died. The local papers and the websites tend towards conspiracy theories, something to do with contraband-related activities. But as I stand here now, 2020, in my old house, I remember him describing how his company created artificial wrecks to drop onto the seabed for rich divers to, inverted commas, find. But what I most remember is his joke, made several times in any one conversation, about how Oxford is a bit like that too. I leave, and at the end of Princes Street, I go to the East Oxford community, once the boys' school that Clive attended, but today it's a community centre, and today the Romanians are having an election. A Romanian flag flies above the old school door. It's the presidential election in Romania. There's a queue outside, parked roundabout with their hazard lights flashing are Uber drivers and taxis. Doris and Olive, Clive and Peter are the past. This is the present. I'm somewhere in between. So that's a sense of the place I'm writing from. Like, you know, if you imagine past and present as you know, the inside and outside of a coat or something. I'm trying to write from the line.
How much is this an elegiac book then?
I suppose it's an elegiac book in the sense that it's about a lot of things that are no longer here. It's an attempt to evince ways in which they might still be here, that discovering something is a way of bringing it back to life. And, you know, taking these walks and finding out about a place that I'd lived in for 30 years and that I thought I knew about, it kind of lit up my days, really. It lit up my walks, it lit up my thinking. It's elegiac in the sense as well that there's nothing quite like a place that thinks it's permanent, as Oxford does, to make the people in it think they're temporary. It gives you a kind of illusion of permanence, that we'll always be part of it, but we're not really. And I suppose I wanted to try to bring back, and there are moments in the book, like with Doris and Olive, but there are other moments when I try to reimagine what it might be like to be outside the Morris factory, listening to the cars being made and so on. I don't just think as elegy. I don't just think of elegy really as a mourning for things that are gone. I think that if done in the right way, through art or at least artistic means, the goneness of things can be given, you know, one last chance to kind of flare up in front of you.
This is the essence of the real book: the discovery, the walk along somewhere you know, and find out, well, you didn't know, because you're now looking at it in a different way. And this is what you do, if I may say so, superbly, again and again. There is one other thing that you do rather well. All real authors are required to photograph what they see, so we can dot the text with some kind of illumination of sorts. Some people have taken this on board and are not bad at it. Your photographs, some of them are really, really intriguing. Some of the most intriguing pictures I've seen. How much fun did you get in taking the pictures? How adept do you think you are at this?
Well, I guess that was again, I had a principle for taking the photographs, which was that I would try to, again, look at things or see things as if they were going to be gone tomorrow, and actually some of them were. I got very worried, for example, because one of my favorite pictures, Sarah, could you put it up? It's the baker. It's the, did I give you? Yes, number 3, Gibbons Baker. Yes, this. So this was one of my favorite pictures. Now, I took this a few years ago. And what I love about it, you asked me about elegy. I love the fact that the cracked paint, this looks like something, it could be out of Pompeii, couldn't it? You could get up and read the paper, and they said that they found an absolutely classic English bakery buried entire, and it would be W.T. Gibbons Baker, etc. And I was worried because I took it on an old phone and I couldn't get a decent, that's fine, Sarah, now we can have my face again. And I took it on an old phone, and I was really worried because it's not like that anymore. What I was interested in was not just the kind of lettering of the old shop front. Incidentally, I find these kind of palimpsestic shop fronts incredibly moving. As if you look at it in the right way, squint in the proper manner, you will see the old shop. You'll hear the old tills ringing and so on. And what I loved about it was all the little notices in the front. And I thought to myself, these notices, a fair, a jumble sale, a lost cat, this is a whole slipstream of time, really, which official time doesn't deal with. The big history, the history of people, the history of great men, the history of great buildings. And there's all this stuff going on in shop windows, these little markers of the ordinary, of the everyday. And I became fascinated by the disappearing everyday.
What's the relationship then between the picture and the writing? Every picture tells a story. Do you repeat yourself? Does one illuminate the other? Are they separate?
Well, I tried to find pictures. I tried to find images and take pictures that were both quirky and also said something, I guess, about time, about passing time, as if there was a new kind of tense that I could find, which is the special tense inhabited by a notice in a shop window about something that's happening in 2 weeks, but 5 years after the shop has closed. We don't have that many tenses to play with, past, present, and future. It's a pretty actually basic, rather banal meat and potatoes kind of way of thinking about time. But actually, the inside of ourselves is not spent in those kinds of time at all. It's spent in these little alleyways and these pathways between the times, these little pockets. And as many of the pictures as I could create that or find that underlined that sense, really, were the better, really. And I did begin to look for a particular kind of picture. There are many left, and when Mick and I were choosing them, we were deciding, incidentally, with Sarah, that we should have a separate website for the parts of the book, parts that I wrote that don't make it into the book, and the photos that don't make it into the book, because I feel that I was trying to do something with images there, which is incidentally quite fashionable. There is an interest in kind of there are whole Twitter feeds on shop palimpsests and faded shop signs and things. So I'm not pretending to originality here, but I'm saying that I am part of a community, I think, of people who notice or are taught to notice a specific set of things, which is an interaction of tenses in cityscapes. And what made it especially enriching to do in Oxford was that Oxford has so much other official stuff to look at that actually we are free to stop looking at things, stop looking up at, towers and things like that, and start looking more at pavements, at manhole covers and railings, which were made by the Lucy factory in Jericho, which was still going when I was here. And I used to go down to the very picturesque St. Sepulchre's Cemetery and listen to the night shift of the Lucy factory as the work was going on. That's now being developed. That's in Philip Pullman too.
We should say that the photographs as they appear, of course, in the book are in black and white, whereas the image that we showed here was in colour. And the public out there who feel cheated when they buy their copy of the book would have to pay twice the price if they wanted them in full colour. So you're getting a bargain, I believe.
Think of the saving.
Absolutely. Now then, I'm trying to edge you towards giving us another section from the book itself. Could you?
Yeah, this is a section about Summertown. And what I'll do, actually, I will just read, I'll read two sections, one of which contains, well, it finishes with a poem. But I thought I would, while I read this, Sarah, would you put the final picture on while I read? So I'm just going to read two bits now, which are about, so I'm going to read a section from the book about doubles. So I talked about doubles earlier, and I wanted to talk a little bit about how I see the conjunction of selves writing the book. One of the themes in my book, incidentally, is my childhood in the small Belgian town of Bouillon. And this is a section where my grandmother turns up, and I imagine her communicating to me through the charity shops of Oxford by sending me clothes. But this is also about Summertown. In his gloriously nasty novel, Dirty Tricks, Michael Dibdin calls the people of Summertown the lumpen bourgeoisie. It's a play on Marx's lumpen proletariat, but you don't need to know German political theory to know it's not a compliment. But a big draw in Summertown is the quality of the charity shops. It's the Sotheby's of charity shopping. I wrote earlier that hardware shops were the canary in the coal mine of a community. In the same vein, charity shops are the pulse of its demographic. Its stopped pulse maybe, but still its pulse. In Summertown, I know I'm in a university city because the books are doggedly annotated for the first 20 or so pages and then unread. The furniture is outstanding. I have a marble-topped console table, some chairs, and a bookshelf from Helen and Douglas House. I've always found clothes here that fitted me uncannily well, many of them bespoke tailored, like the ones my grandmother, Bouillon's couturière, made for me when I was sent to school in England. I possess a wardrobe of tailored jackets, a suit, and several shirts that fit me so perfectly that I feel she's there, on the other side, using the charity shop, that portal between worlds, to attire me for my adult life. I'm always looking out for her latest confections, which reach me through the vestimentary Ouija boards of Oxford's charity shops. I'm wearing my favourite jacket right now, handmade for someone exactly my size, with embroidered cuffs and a silk lining. It fits me perfectly, while having been designed for someone else. It strikes me, as I write this now, that this is how I feel about my life in Oxford. And I'll just read you the last bit from the book, which is called Station Coda. The book starts at the station and it ends at the station. I'm at the station again. It's late, so it's the sirens of the freight trains I can hear, exulting in the endless track they have ahead of them, all those empty stations they can slice through while we sleep. Like wild animals calling to get the measure of the jungle, It's dark and it's time to go. As always, I approach the station and then turn back. From the day I came here, I thought I'd leave. I didn't know. This is the poem. Connoisseur of the noises things make when they leave. The clip of heels on pavements, the suitcases on rubber wheels, a station pigeon's piebald underwing, the bike chain's sticky grind. A car chews through the gears, a train burns through a sleeve of cable sparks. The barges clear their foghorn throats. There are so many ways of going, yet you stay. Thank you. Back to my face, Sarah. Thank you. So there you go. You get a sense of the fact that this is a book, you know, it's about Oxford, of course, but it's about, I would hope that it's also about a way of seeing and a way of feeling.
The poem, how do you think of yourself primarily? Do you think of yourself as the person who turns to poetry first? Are you a poet and then you do the other things? Or are you a novelist who also happens to turn his hand to the poem now and again? And how did that work? How did that work with this book? What made you resist writing a poem and to write a section in prose instead?
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm out of practice writing poems, and writing this book made me start to write poems again for the first time in about 10 or 12 years. Not with any great confidence, I must say, because I think that poetry is not just a thing that you do. It's a way of amassing and then redirecting and sending back out experience. So I'm still not entirely sure, but it contains quite a few poems about Oxford, including the tale of how I could not write a poem, which contains half of the poem I didn't write, which is a slightly paradoxical genre, the kind of double bluffing genre whereby you say, here's something I didn't do. Look, here it is, in its undone way. I suppose I'm interested in form. There's a section in my book where I take Baudelaire for a visit to the Westgate shopping centre. And I think about how material finds its form or form finds the material. And I reach no conclusion about that, incidentally. But I don't know. I think now things come to me in the form of prose, but not necessarily as stories, as some kind of sticky and undried substance between the poem and prose itself.
This is the same answer about the photographs. When I asked you, what decides you? Do you take the picture, or do you write it out, or how do they relate to each other? It's the same issue with the poetry too. Is this a mystery to you? Are you in charge, or is it in charge of you?
I used to think, I would like to think, as all writers would like to think, that they were incredibly versatile writers and that each new thing they had to say found its form. I don't think I am a versatile writer. I think I basically have the same things to say, but if you want to use the kind of cake icing analogy, I have different nozzles through which to process it. And you know, in my academic writing at the moment, I've been thinking about the relationship of the finished poem to the note, and how it's wrong to assume that the note is that the prose note is the preparatory uncooked stage, and the poem is the beautiful cooked delicacy. I don't like that categorization, and it's inevitable, therefore, that alongside writing an academic book about that, I should have written a topographical, creative, historical, poetic book that exemplifies exactly those things. And the poems I'm trying to write at the moment are much less, they arrive on the page with much less of a sense of what they should be than the poems that I wrote when I first wrote my first couple of books of poetry, where I had a sense of what a poem was. But that was a kind of inflexibility on my part.
What I'd like to do is to encourage some of our audience to type their questions, to get them to come up on the side, and I'll pitch these back to to Patrick, we should try and get a little bit of that in, if you could, while we've got time, because we need to tie this up comparatively soon. Tell me though, Patrick, how polarized is Oxford? The town and gown split that happens in many university cities. How dramatic is it, or invisible is it in Oxford?
I suppose, I mean, that's the perennial question. When I was an undergraduate in Cambridge, I was very aware of the town and gown split. In Oxford, I'm less aware of it because, quite simply, the town and gown do not share the same spaces. The split always arises when the same spaces are shared. I used to canvass for the Labour Party in the 90s around the areas that I now live in, and they were all full of people who were from here. If I was to do that now, I would be encountering people who mostly weren't. So you can't really have a tension. You can only have tension where territory is disputed. Oxford, the city of Oxford, the central parts of Oxford, shared between colleges, developers, and colleges who are also developers, and businesses. There's not much scope for any of the famous, the fabled, the mythical town gown fights. There just isn't. So I think it's a myth.
You mentioned canvassing for the Labour Party. Somebody asks, Jonathan Davison asks, do you write much about the politics of Oxford beyond referencing the militant car workers? And he then notes that he's the son of one of those.
Yes, yeah. There's a few sections on industrial unrest in Oxford. Yeah, so I do write about that. Maybe less than I ought to, but I couldn't fit everything in. But I mean, one of the great presences, there are three guiding figures, incidentally, in this book. One is Olive Gibbs, who was chair of C&D and Labour councillor and Labour mayor of Oxford, and I was proud to be in the same party as her. And Ruskin, John Ruskin, who's one of my heroes, is also in the book. And Lawrence Dale, who was a strange visionary town planner from the 1940s, who writes a book about healing the divisions between Oxford. Now, the town planner everyone knows about in Oxford is Thomas Sharp. But before Thomas Sharp, there was Lawrence Dale, who wrote this quite extraordinary book. It's like prose poetry, written in this very kind of rhythmical prose that you simply don't usually find in planning documents. And
that was written in wartime.
Yes, it was. Yeah, and it came out from Faber in 1944. On wartime paper.
Yeah, amazing.
So those are the three people who helped me see the place in different ways: political, aesthetic, social, urban planning wise.
What's a deep, dark Oxford secret no one knows? Asks Fran Brereton.
Well, there are several in this book, but I don't want to be giving any spoilers, Fran. But thank you for the question.
Okay. Catriona Seth asks, what did you discover when you were working on the book? You discovered a lot, but what was completely new to you? You talked about going on these voyages of discovery, looking at things you'd seen and seeing them in a new way. What was significant? What if you had to pick one item from all? What was it?
That's a good question. I don't think any single item sticks out. What did happen to me, which was a kind of revelation, was the fact that if you tilt your mind and your mind's eye and your way of thinking and feeling in the right direction, you can still capture some of what has gone. And I suppose one of the analogies I make, so perhaps this is my discovery, really, and I don't think it's my discovery, but I wrote a little piece in the book about how Sylvester's hardware store on Magdalen Road is a kind of double of the Pitt Rivers Museum. And the Pitt Rivers Museum is exciting to me because, and I also incidentally talk about the relationship of our museums to looting and colonialism and all of those darker histories that hide under that rather charming neutral word collecting. But I felt that I could make my paths through Oxford by thinking of this extraordinary hardware shop, which I've been going to for 30 years, now being run by the people. It's over 100 years old. And you walk through the shop and the smells are different. You know, you begin with things like the cat litter, the plants and so on, and you move through to oils and various different kinds of paints and so on and so forth. Everything grouped according to use. And I thought that this was the Pitt Rivers, and the Pitt Rivers and this place were talking to each other, sharing a way of seeing the world and organizing the world, which I liked. Because, why did I like it? Because fundamentally it's non-linear and non-chronological. These ways of arranging material, arranging feelings, sensations, governed by how they were used, what they corresponded to, not when they came. So if you access things the right way, one particular way of doing something that's 200 years old is still in correspondence with today's way of doing something.
Indeed so.
So it's no single thing. It's more like a connectedness that I think I got, and that helped me to see not just Oxford actually, but loads of stuff. I still haven't processed the things, the ways of seeing and thinking and feeling and noticing that writing this book created in me.
So what are you going to tackle next? What would you like to tackle next?
What would I like to what?
Tackle next.
Oh, sorry. I'd be content with re-becoming a poet, a modest author of a 64-page slim volume of poems.
Patrick McGuinness and Real Oxford, an absolutely splendid volume. Do we all applaud? Can we applaud to you through Zoom? I think that was a terrific presentation. Patrick, thank you very much indeed. And for all of you out there, the next thing to do, of course, is to buy your copy of Real Oxford by Patrick McGuinness, which is a really fat volume with all the information that all the pieces that you've had read to you today, plus a whole host more of things, all for under a tenner. And Sarah and Mick will tell you exactly. There it is coming up. That's how you buy it. You can see it there. Thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Mick, and thank you, Sarah. I've had a really interesting, pleasant, thought-provoking evening.
Good to work with you.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Mick, did you want to say anything?
Thank you. Bye-bye. No, really, just to say, add my thanks to everyone else's thanks, Patrick. I think the book really is a collection of connections, and you know, if you buy it, you'll be entertained by it, you'll be engaged by it, and you'll discover all sorts of different Oxfords and all sorts of different people, from Clive the house converter and Doris the cat lover on the one hand to, well, Iris Murdoch and Robert Maxwell at the other end of the spectrum. It really is that varied and that exciting and interesting as well. So thanks again, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Patrick. And yes, please do buy the book, whether you buy it from us or, since it's Independent Bookshop Week, from your local independent bookshop. That would be great. Thank you.